Thank you, Dr. Stevens. I know that she's got to rush off and hopefully make an air flight to Southern California that leaves in less than an hour. We want to continue along with the program. Again, to remind folks that we are live. We're live streaming and we're live broadcasting. And we want to get into the next sequence and make sure that everybody is ready. I was introduced really to the new standards for the arts last week at a successful meeting. And frankly, when I got a look at the scope and the amount of work that needs to be done for our students and to make the art experience so much better, I was just absolutely blown away. So I asked Jack, an old friend who is also part of all of this years ago. He helped us get some grants and so forth that were very much a part of what this is. So I asked Jack to come and give us a brief presentation of what we will be experiencing next year. And as a matter of fact, I think July 16 is the first time some of this will actually roll out. I think it's going to be spectacular. I can't wait to get going on it. But right now, let's have Jack Mitchell from the California Department of Education, our lead for Visual and Performing Arts Secondary.
Thanks, Hamish. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to come to Monterey County, especially to be in this facility, because as Hamish said, when he had this idea, he and I were talking, and there just happened to be at that time a facilities grant coming out from the state that provided some, at least initial funding for this project. So it's wonderful to be back here with Hamish and his colleagues and also in this beautiful space. I'm Jack Mitchell. I'm the consultant for secondary visual performing arts, and I'm also the career technical education consultant. And Vicki is the inspiration. I am the information. So I'm not the inspirational part of this program, and there will be no confusion about that, I'm sure, when I'm done. I have 30 minutes to share with you at least a 40-minute presentation and probably something more like a couple of hours about the new standards. And I wanted to start with a slide that says, change is good. Okay, change is good. One of the challenges we have in education is that we don't all believe that change is good. Okay, and when something like new standards come along, our immediate response is, oh no, what do I have to do now? Okay, and so the department made me take that slide out, by the way. Change is not good, is not approvable by the department. But so I wanted to talk today about what we are going to talk about. So we just completed the process of doing a draft of the standards, and we'll talk about who was involved in that in a minute. But today we're going to talk about the legislation that required California to do new standards in visual and performing arts. And that legislation required that they be patterned after the National Core Art Standards. And so we'll talk a little bit about the National Core Art Standards. I was fortunate enough to be on the theater writing team for the National Core Art Standards. And so I'm very familiar with the process that those teams in each arts discipline went through and how we came to the National Core Art Standards. So if you have questions about where did they get that, if it's in theater, I can help you with that. The California process, and the California process is a legislated process. It's not an open process where we go, let's bring 15 people together and decide what the new standards will look like. The law says you must have 20 people. The law says the meetings must be open. The law says we're covered by Bagley-Keene, which means you can't have side conversations. So the people who came together to talk about the standards couldn't talk about the standards even to their colleagues outside of the meeting room, okay? Because that would be an unconstituted meeting. So we'll talk about the process, the shifts in the new standards, samples of NCAS standards, and then next steps as the work goes forward. And there are several slides that I'm just going to pass over because, as I say, it's a longer conversation and we only have time for a certain amount of it. This is the legislation, AB 2862, and you can read it right there. And the most important part of this is where it says that the standards must be based on the National Core Art Standards, because the initial standards that we had in 2002 did not have to be based on any pre-existing set of standards, but these did. Okay? So I want to start with a very quick opening activity, and we took about 5 minutes to do this when we did it in Sacramento, but we'll take about a minute. I'll really just ask you to think about how you currently use standards in your work, in the work that you do. Okay? I taught for 22 years, and for the first 15 years, I had no idea that there were standards in the arts. Okay, I taught out of a district-approved curriculum guide, and that curriculum guide was designed around the standards, but I didn't have any personal connection to the standards. I had a very personal connection to the curriculum guide. Okay, and so, but now we're asking that teachers be familiar with and connected to the standards. So think about how you use the standards, how they impact you, and we would do a pair share activity, but I think we're going to move through that. But be thinking of that as we talk about this. Okay, we want to start with the NCAS, National Core Art Standards are the NCAS, all right? And the NCAS were created, it began in 2011 when the people like myself from each state, it's called CDA, State Education Agencies, Directors of Arts Education, the people like at the Department of Education level, we meet once a year and we have monthly phone calls. And that year when we met, one of the people said, last time we addressed art standards nationally was 1992. Has anything changed since then? This was 2011. So it became pretty clear pretty quickly that there was consensus around revision of the standards. And so a long process began that ended in 2014, 2011 to 2014. A coalition was formed to weigh in and guide the creation of the new standards. And you can see the various arts organizations were part of that. The College Board played a really critical role, which we'll talk about in a second. But it was not just a single group of people. It was a large coalition of people, all of whom weighed in. And as you can imagine, a process that California did in 6 meetings over 3 months took 3 years to do. So the National Core Art Standards were developed over 3 years. There were content standards writing teams of, it says 10 to 12, but the theater team I know had 15 people on it, and the media arts team had even more people on it. But there were representatives from each of the states that you see on the map. The unique thing about California is that we had at least one member of each discipline-specific writing team. Okay, so states like Louisiana and Wyoming didn't have anyone on the writing teams. But most of the states had a person on dance, or they might have 2 people on media arts, but California had a writer on each team. And so that's why when you look at the new standards, at the NCAS standards, there's a lot of similarity with California standards. Okay, these are the people who were involved. Some of you may know. I know some of you know Armelin. A lot of you know Chris Alexander. My name is up there, Dane Olson from Los Angeles, Shauna Habel, and these were all California members of the various writing teams. Okay, the process, as I say, took 3 years. There were over 1,000, they went out to public comment 3 different times. And when that public comment came back, the comment was taken seriously, and the standards that we had written to that point were completely revised based on that commentary. And as you can see, 1,056,000 responses and comments. 65% of the comments were from California educators. And so California had a very large role in the national standards, not only by writing team members, but by the number of comments on the draft standards when they went out to comment. Okay, so the national standards, if you have a lot of time on your hands, you can read the conceptual framework. Better to wait till the California standards come out, because there will be a framework associated with those as well. But the conceptual framework was what we, the NCAS writers, used to put these standards together. And I'm not sure whether it was tonight or maybe Vicki talked about backwards design. And the process we used was the Wiggins and McTighe backwards design theory. And so when you see the layout of the standards, it'll become more clear. The College Board was integrally involved in this process. They had members at each of the writing team meetings, and they also served as sort of a dramaturg for the group, in the sense that they provided us with samples of international standards. We spent time going over the Australian standards, the standards that they had in the UK, and the College Board was responsible for pulling all of that together. They also provided strategies for us for for designing standards that were aligned to the Common Core standards as well, because they had a tremendous hand in those standards. And the new standards are all about artistic literacy. And artistic literacy, the knowledge and understanding required to participate fully in the arts, okay? To respond, connect through symbolic and metaphoric forms, etc. And this is the format that's used in the National Core Art Standards. And you can see that it is sort of a backwards design format. We began with artistic literacy foundations, both philosophical foundations and lifelong goals for arts literate students or arts literate individuals. We identified artistic processes, and you can see that they mirror the current California processes, and then a series of both anchor standards and content level standards. So artistic literacy, and then artistic processes, creating. In California, we have creating, performing, responding. We have historical and cultural context and connecting. And they eliminated historical and cultural context because that was part of connecting in the collaborative's vision. Okay, we move through some of these quickly. Okay. So the National Core Art Standards are lifelong learning. They're composed of anchor standards, enduring understanding, essential questions, anchor standards, and performance standards. And they're intended to guide curriculum. So they are used to determine what your students need to know and be able to do at the end of the day. This is a pretty in-depth slide, but it talks about the philosophical foundations versus the lifelong goals for people who have accomplished mastery of the standards. One of the things we talked about in the connecting part was community engagement, but also careers. And the California standards, when they come out, you will see, and they will be available for you to review on July 16th. Okay, the draft will be available on July 16th. I won't be showing you examples of those because that would be outside of Bagley-Keene, and we're not allowed to do that. So, but in the California version, there is also a section on the arts as career. Okay, and they're designed around artistic processes, creating, performing, and responding. And those were the ones that are pretty much universal globally. In almost every country's set of standards, they deal with performing, creating, and responding. In California, the California people on each of those committees said, well, what about connecting? In California, that connecting piece is critical, and we need to be sure that there is connecting in there. And so the NCAS and the new California standards will also have connecting in 3 of the disciplines. In music and visual art, connecting is embedded. So the process components are also broken down. So creating is a multiple staged process. So first you have to envision or conceptualize and then develop as part of creating. Performing involves rehearsing and then the actual sharing of the performance. And of course, performing has different iterations in the different arts disciplines. So artists, visual artists don't actually perform, but they present. Media artists produce. Okay, but all of that is part of performing. And then responding is broken into reflecting, interpreting, and critiquing. And the California standards are organized around these components and subcomponents. And connecting is interrelating, and empathizing. And empathizing was one that the California people fought very hard for. As you heard Vicki talk about, one of the most valuable things we teach as arts teachers is that ability to see from another perspective, to see another person's point of view. And there were a lot of folks on the writing teams who didn't feel like empathizing was something that was within the purview of arts instruction. And many of the California people on the committee said it is the core of arts instruction, is building the capacity in students to empathize. So you're going to see this when you see the new art standards. There will be process standards for performance standards for each of the subgroups as well. So there are anchor standards across all, and the anchor standards are common across all disciplines. So the anchor standard for creating in visual art is going to be exactly the same as the anchor standard for creating in music. All right? And this was a big challenge as writing teams to come up with and agree on these anchor standards. And so the anchor standards were revised a number of times, but they are common across the arts disciplines and they unify the standards. We also began with the Wiggins and McTighe with enduring understandings and essential questions. So each of the new standards will begin with an enduring understanding that all students should understand this at the end of their arts careers, and then a question that guides pedagogy. In what do students who have accomplished this standard need to know? And then what we traditionally call the standards themselves are the performance standards. And those are the standards that are unique to each discipline and unique within each artistic process. These standards are organized by grade level, just like the California standards are now. There was a lot of talk about grade banding the standards, but the California people said it's important for us to reinforce that the expectation of arts at each grade, and so we need to have standards for each grade level to achieve. There was concern if we grade banded the standards, K through 2, grade 2, everybody would be working like crazy to cram all those standards in. So we have grade level standards, and the California will be grade level standards. And then at the high school, we currently have, as you know, proficient and advanced standards. And in the new standards will have proficient, accomplished, and advanced. And the reason we added an advanced in the California standards and the national is that if a high school student goes through 3 years of a particular discipline, what are they working towards in that 3rd year? And so what the groups did was sort of begin with the advanced standards with sort of an AP level approach to what would an AP kid need to know, what would that pre-college level be, and design standards around that. So the new advanced standards are for those students who have had multiple years in a given discipline. So here's an example of a standard. So just, we can take a minute and take a look at it. This is a theater standard, and it is, the artistic process is create, and the component is develop, and the standard is employ vocal movement, technique to convey specific dramatic intention. Okay, now think about the current standards for theater, if you're a theater guy, or the current standards in any discipline, and what do you notice about the standard, the actual performance standard, employ vocal and movement technique to convey specific dramatic intention? Yes?
There's no content, it's just the process.
Yeah. Employ vocal and movement technique around what?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is one of the major shifts in the new standards, is that the new standards identify the process that students will take. It is the teacher's responsibility to provide the content. Okay? And that provides tremendous flexibility for those of us who are secondary teachers and have expertise in our content. It is a real challenge for elementary school teachers, if they are generalist teachers, who don't have deep content knowledge. Okay, and so it's one of the things that we're going to have to provide professional development around. And here's another advanced standard. Research and synthesize cultural and historical information to support artistic choices. Again, where is the content? Okay, and the idea is that the instructor provides the content. There is flexibility in content. So if I'm teaching this in a particular area, I can be culturally responsive in the content that I choose, and I can still be sure that the students know how to research and synthesize cultural information to support their artistic choices. Okay, and so couple of examples. Where am I time-wise, do you know?
2 more minutes.
Jackie, okay. So here's a couple of examples. So take a second and look at those. These are both from visual arts. Use shading to transform a 2-dimensional shape into what appears to be a 3-dimensional form, or brainstorm multiple approaches to a creative art or design problem. Okay. What did you see? Anybody, anything anyone would like to say about this? Yes?
Well, it's a lot more open-ended and multiple ways of solving that problem rather than, okay, do this.
Right. Add shading to make it 3-dimensional. Well, what else might you do? You know. So yes, I think that's one of the things you're going to see in the new standards, is that California standards, is they will be a lot more open-ended. Okay, we're not going to discuss with our partners. And then this is an example. One of the new things that was added, a separate piece of legislation, AB 37, said that the California standards would align with the national standards by also providing K-12 standards in media arts as a separate discipline. This does not mean that visual art can't have media arts in it. It does not mean that you can't do digital music. It doesn't mean that there can't be media in other artistic disciplines. But there are districts around the state that teach media arts as a unique discipline. And so there are now a set of standards for those districts that do that. So these are some examples of media arts standards that you can take a look at. Okay, so now a quick overview of the process. I talked about this as a legal process in California, and the way it goes is as follows. We begin with focus groups. People apply to be members of a focus group. Anyone here a member of a focus group before in the first round? Okay. The focus groups come together and talk about what the standards need to do. And the focus group commentary is pulled together to provide guidance for the people who are actually doing the writing of the standards. Those standards are then passed on to the Instructional Quality Commission, and the Instructional Quality Commission has the authority to change those standards in any way they want. They could in fact throw them all out, but then they would have a lot of work to do. So generally speaking, what happens is that the Instructional Quality Commission gets them and goes, these look good. And they move them onto the state board. The state board approves it. The legislation that required these standards said that the state board must approve or revise the standards by March 2019, by January 2019. So that's coming up. Okay, so the standards writing process has already taken place. Those standards will be available. They will be formally submitted to the Instructional Quality Commission the third week in July, and they will be available for you to see the second week in July because they're part of the agenda, and the agenda is public. And so you can go to that agenda and you can see what's being presented to the state board as the new California standards. To the Instructional Quality Commission. The Instructional Quality Commission makes any adjustments, and then they put them out to public review. And that's when any of you have the capacity to provide comment on the standards. The standards don't have any content. We want some, whatever your comment is, you are allowed to submit that in writing, okay? And as I mentioned with the national standards, there was a tremendous body of public comment, and all of that public comment was viewed, and there were major changes in the draft based on that comment. So I would urge all of you to, if you are interested in this standards creation process, make public comment, because the public comment doesn't go to those teams of writers, it goes directly to the state board. Because the last group that can make a modification to the draft is the state board. And so the public comment will probably close. I think they said that it closes November 1st. And then the comment is added into, is used to modify the standards. And the standards are presented along with the commentary to the state board. Okay? So that's our process. And here's a visual that shows how that works. We have completed the top row, we have completed the second row. We are now beginning work on the frameworks, and so there's a call for framework participants. I think it actually closed Friday, was it? Monday? Okay. The Standards Advisory Committee, 21-member committee. Okay, and the framework is the next process. So once the standards are approved, there will be a group that has already been selected, and as soon as the frameworks are approved in January, that group will begin writing the framework in March. And so by December of the following year, they should have a framework prepared to send to the state board. These are some websites that you can go to stay up to date on what's going on. And then this is my contact information, and Mary Rice is my colleague at the Department of Education who handles the elementary visual and performing arts, and she can answer questions about this as well. And hopefully we have a little time if there are questions that I can respond to. Yes?
Can you go back to the last slide, please? Thank you.
Yeah, that is in an unseeable blue, I'm sure that it, yes.
So
Yeah.
the subject area committee can only have 21 members, and there's 5 disciplines for each
Yes.
visual and performing arts, compared to math, where there's 21 people writing math standards. So
Right.
we had to divide our 21 up.
Yes. And that was a pretty major bone of contention initially, but Mary Rice and I found out as consultants exactly what kind of power we had. It's I mean, they say 21, and so 21 is what you get. And so if you have multiple disciplines, and we added another discipline, so our working groups were groups of 4. There was one that had I think they were all working groups of 4. But there, in each of the working groups, there was elementary represented, middle school represented, and secondary, or 9 through 12 represented. So there were people who actually taught in that content area at that particular grade level. So it was the theater people were an amazing group of people, and they were very much in tune with the national standards. So there was very little modification. And I would say that, is there anybody who has gone to in-service on the National Core Art Standards as part of curriculum preparation? Okay, you don't have to worry, because the California standards are going to be very close to you don't have to say, oh, I got to get rid of all that now. No, you don't. There's going to be tremendous similarity. Most of what changed in theater, because I'm most familiar with those folks, was a little languaging, but there was no major intent changes. There was one where we thought one process really occurred before another, and so we moved that block of performance standards up. Yes?
Can you tell us anything generally about what changes in music and then visual arts?
I can tell you that the music people made minimal changes. The visual arts people made the most changes. But as each group made modifications, those modifications had to be approved by the whole group. Okay? And so theater would say, we want to add this language to this standard, and we would have to take that to the whole group of 21 and say, this was our reasoning, this is how we came up with this, this is how I know that the art people had more changes, because we had to look at more of their revision pieces. But I would say that those are the 2 disciplines that are going to have the most. And when you look at especially the National Core Art Standards versus the old California music standards, the music people had much, much more work to do than any of the other disciplines because of the way the National Core Art Standards were written. Other questions? Okay, I think that these standards are going to provide really exciting guidance for teachers. I think they are also going to make it possible for you to bring your creativity into the standards-based instructional process. But they will require that you look at your students in a new way, that you look at your students as the creators of art and as co-producers of art, not just as people who learn what you know. And so I think it's going to be a new era, a new generation, when we're currently talking about rollout and how we go about rollout, how we fund rollout, but the county offices will play a key role in that. And so I thank you for your time, and you're welcome to contact me. I think you took my email down, but it's real simple, jmitchell@cde.ca.gov, and I will answer any individual questions that I have. And I urge you to take a look at that on July 11th if you're interested, and you can see exactly what those groups came up with that they're putting forward for the new California Art Standards. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.